Let's face it, nobody wakes up in the morning excited about GRC. For those of us that understand it, it's an often thankless job. For those that don't, it's a bunch of paperwork they really don't want to do. No matter which side of the table you're on, it's important that you have the right tools and strategy to deliver an effective and efficient GRC program. My name is Michael Meese. I'm a cybersecurity leader who led the selection and implementation of OnSpring at H&R Block. Today, I'm sharing with you how we rolled out our long-term GRC vision by using a quick win strategy to deliver immediate ROI. My goal is to demonstrate how our successes can be applied to your GRC program and help you achieve your strategic objectives. The core of this approach will focus on establishing an implementation roadmap that is broken down into delivery milestones. This approach allows you to achieve quick and continuous delivery while working on your strategic objectives. The quick win strategy ensures that your platform is not only actually successful, but is also perceived as being successful, which can often be just as important. Now, while the GRC team is a single team, it's broken up into 13 wide-ranging programs that cover all three of the verticals within governance, risk, and compliance. These programs include things such as training and awareness, metrics, vulnerability management, third-party risk management, and regulatory compliance. For a long time, the programs that make up the GRC team were done in a vacuum, largely disconnected from the business and from each other. The team wrote policies that lacked meaningful guidance or that nobody knew about. We conducted risk assessments that lacked insight and were largely ignored. And every audit was a mad scramble to gather the data that we needed to prove to our auditors about the work that was being done. We'd already started making significant progress on these core issues, but wanted to bring OnSpring in to supercharge our efforts and make the most effective use of our resources. Now, I would be lying to you if I said it wasn't tempting to try to tackle all 13 programs at the same time the minute we got our hands on the platform. While this would have been possible, it would have taken approximately 2 years given the people and resources that we had available. We couldn't wait 2 years to start getting value out of our purchase, and our CISO definitely was not going to wait 2 years to see results. We knew we needed to break things down into smaller pieces, which is where it starts to get more complex. We started by determining the impact of loading each program into OnSpring and what impact that would have on the overall organization. This meant that we had to make hard decisions about what would have the most impact right now. Here are some questions that you can ask yourself to help you determine the impact of a program. Do you have a working program in place already? Is it a service that you deliver cross-functionally? How many people are impacted by this program? And how much executive visibility does it have? There are a lot of different cliches to describe what comes out of this process. Big rocks, table legs, tent stakes, or as I like to call them, your big wins. Basically, it's the things that would make news across the organization when we launched them. People would notice, and it would significantly improve how we operate as an organization. However, impact is just one facet, as those high-impact programs are often the most time-consuming and complex to deliver. So we then evaluated each program by the people and resources it would take to load them into OnSpring and stack-ranked them against each other. Here are some questions that you can ask yourself to help you determine level of effort. Are the program processes well-defined? Can you use out-of-box applications and workflows? How many relationships does it have to other applications? And finally, how many stakeholders are there? All of these can increase the complexity of the delivery of this application, making it require more resources to deliver. The result of this process is what I call our quick win candidates. Things that we're able to deliver with less effort and usually with less waves across the organization, but still allow people to understand the value provided by our OnSpring platform. Basically, these are the things that will keep you in the news and the budget conversations while you work on your big wins. After we had determined the level of effort and level of impact for each of these programs, it was time to consider both factors to determine an overall level of prioritization, which you can see here. I want to spend a moment decompressing this to give you a little bit more insight into how we approached this and why. Our organization was already heavily invested into another technology platform with GRC capabilities that predated my tenure. This implementation was beset by a wide variety of management issues and poor planning that meant the GRC team had never received the full value despite a significant investment in both time and resources. Needless to say, after all of those empty promises, our CISO was skeptical that OnSpring would be any different. The executive attitude towards the platform meant that we needed to get immediate value out of our implementation and establish those quick wins to build momentum and prove that this was going to be different. The challenges with the management of the previous platform meant that we were also given complete management over the OnSpring implementation. This was key because it also gave us end-to-end control over the implementation roadmap and overall prioritization. It also presented another challenge, as the GRC team did not have a single developer or engineer as a current member of our team. This meant that the low-code, no-code, and easy automation features of OnSpring were especially attractive to us. Needless to say, we took full advantage of the training. Because it was important for us to get off to a fast start, we knew that we needed to start with a quick win instead of a big win. At the time we purchased OnSpring, our policy management was done entirely through a combination of email, SharePoint, and DocuSign. Everyone involved agreed that this was not a very efficient set of processes, meaning there was a strong appetite to change our internal processes to match the out-of-box workflows for policy management that come with OnSpring. Due to the minimal amount of complexity and build work involved with this, we were able to successfully launch policy management into OnSpring within 30 days of our initial purchase. This quick launch helped us gain considerable buy-in with our executive staff and set great momentum for the rest of the implementation. Third-party risk management was chosen as our next priority, despite it being one of the largest and most complex programs that we had to integrate. There were two main reasons that drove this decision. One, it was the business case that we presented to get our OnSpring platform purchase approved. It's absolutely imperative that you deliver the things to your executives that you promise. Otherwise, you'll find that your implementation and your overall program start to lose executive backing. Second, it was the only program that was fully operational in the previous technology platform, which was being sunset a few months later. It would have been bad optics and a gap in our capabilities if we were to lose any data or functionalities when that technology platform was sunset. A word of advice about prioritization and roadmaps. As soon as you finish them, they're out of date, so stay flexible. A good example of this happened to us during our implementation. As you can see here, cloud governance was our third priority. However, 2 months into our implementation, the leader of our cloud governance program left the organization. That meant that we lost a considerable amount of expertise and leadership from that particular program, which increased the complexity of the delivery. Because of that change and others, we decided to move quantitative risk management up to number 3 to better align with the resources we had available and our strategic objectives. Things are going to change. The landscape will shift, and that's okay. This initial prioritization gives you an excellent baseline to later communicate what changed and also why it changed. Now we're going to take a bit of a dive into each of those 3 programs so that you can understand a little bit more how they work and why we approached it that way. As we talked about earlier, we started with policy management for a few key reasons. We had significant control over the policy draft and approval process, meaning that we could make changes to that process without expending significant resources or political capital to make those changes. The processes that we did have in place were also not very efficient, meaning that we could change those processes around to match what came out of the OnSpring out-of-box offering, meaning there was significantly less build work to do. Finally, Policy management makes an excellent foundation for the rest of your GRC platform and your overall GRC program, because there will be relationships from those policies to nearly everything else you do in GRC as your platform expands. This is designed to provide an executive overview of our policy management efforts, including key metrics, policies in development, and overall exception statistics. Here you can see a specific policy record, which has all of the typical pieces you would expect to see in an information security policy, including a policy, purpose, and scope statement. We leverage the effective date field to trigger reminders at periodic intervals when it's time for a policy to be reviewed. This ensures that we uphold our policy review lifecycle and none of our policies end up stale or outdated. The reason why policies are such a great foundational piece for your GRC program is because of the relational nature of GRC. This is where you can use your tool to make your life a whole lot easier. For each policy, you have a number of policy sections, which provide more specific guidance for how the enterprise is supposed to operate. Each of these policies will relate to a control in your control library. Because of this relationship, you're able to see a control or policy section that is orphaned from that relationship, meaning that you get continuous visibility into controls that are not supported by policy or policy sections that are not enforced by a control. This creates a pseudo gap analysis that you can continually leverage as your platform expands. You can also leverage those relationships for policy exceptions. This will give you continuous insight into how many policy exceptions there are to any given policy or specific policy section. This means that you will have oversight into which sections might be particularly troublesome and which ones are requiring the most exceptions. Now, you can instantly see a snapshot of how many exceptions there have been to any given policy or policy section. This can give you insight into particularly cumbersome policies or controls that may need additional refinement to align with your business or security strategy. Speaking of policy exceptions, this is one piece of the policy management process that we built completely from the ground up during our 30-day launch. We decided to do this because our policy exception process had very specific requirements for the approval flow to ensure that the appropriate stakeholders were aware of each policy exception. What was unique about our policy exception process is that it required basically two separate approval flows. The first approval flow occurred after initial submission, where it was submitted to the user's leadership for submission approval. This is to ensure appropriate visibility and buy-in from the executive leadership team. Once that approval had occurred, it would then be sent to our risk management, security architecture, security engineering, and legal teams to make a recommendation for or against approval as appropriate. Once those recommendations had been completed, the exception would then go to our CISO or CIO as appropriate for a final decision. Policy exceptions are lengthy by design to discourage it as an initial option. However, putting it into OnSpring gave us a low-friction way to accomplish this process while still maintaining constant visibility, automated notifications, and real-time tracking of every single request. And finally, we have our policy attestations, which leverages survey campaigns to ensure that appropriate stakeholders are aware of every policy and policy section. It also allows them to self-identify any issues with compliance to these policies. As you can see, this creates a relationship back to the parent policy, once again giving you an overall snapshot of your policy health in one single record. For any of you who have already seen OnSpring, you may notice that this tracks largely with what comes out of the box when you purchase OnSpring. This was by design, as we wanted this to be a quick win within our first 30 days. Sticking largely with those out-of-box processes and workflows minimized the amount of build work and allowed us to prioritize the schedule constraint of the 30-day launch. That quick win allowed us to gain significant buy-in from our executives while we worked on our first big win, which was our third-party risk management program. The third-party risk management program was really the defining factor of our OnSpring launch, and we had to get it right. This was due to the high executive visibility as well as the schedule constraints that we talked about earlier. So we started by taking the process that we had in our existing technology platform and trying to break away from the process steps to focus on the process objectives. This is an absolutely essential part of planning, as it's often easy to buy a flexible tool like OnSpring and then take bad processes and put it in a good tool. As you go through your platform planning, it's important that you ask your team these 3 questions as often as possible. 1, what are you trying to accomplish? 2, what are the steps to accomplish that objective? And 3, what is the best way for OnSpring to help you accomplish those objectives? When we did this, we ended up with a hybrid version of what we had before and a new way of accomplishing the same objective that was optimized to how OnSpring processes data and relationships. I personally recommend using a tool like Visio, Lucidchart, or another visual diagramming tool to map out your existing process before you begin. Once you have that existing process mapped out, you can start plotting your efficiencies and improvements as appropriate. This ensures that your entire team is working off of the same process flow, and also provides a visual aid that stimulates solution-oriented thinking. This is a snapshot of our supplier intake request form, which is our central way of receiving work into the third-party risk management program. As with policy exceptions, it's very important that you craft these questions carefully and utilize the help text to elicit specific types of information from your user. Doing this and gathering this information up front will save you a significant amount of time on the back end, not having to go hunt down that information again. This information is vital for completing the risk assessment and must be obtained. Once the intake form is completed, it creates a supplier record and an associated engagement with that supplier. The platform then automatically makes an initial determination on the appropriate risk tier and whether a risk assessment is needed for that particular engagement. This allows your analysts to simply confirm that initial decision and either override it or move forward with the automated determination. If a risk assessment is needed, the analyst is able to send out a security questionnaire and requests for documentation, which is tailored to the tier associated with that engagement. Here, you can see an actual risk assessment after the vendor has already returned their security questionnaire and associated documentation. This process conducts 2 very important and time-saving steps. First, it centralizes all information about that risk assessment into a single application, including the security questionnaire and associated answers, the security documentation, and any communication that may have occurred about that risk assessment. This saves the analyst valuable time having to hunt down that information across multiple systems. And it also reduces the likelihood that something gets missed due to human error not finding it in one of those multiple applications. Second, it also conducts an initial scoring of the security questionnaire, giving the analyst valuable insight into where they should focus their review efforts. Given that the security questionnaire is over 100 questions, this saves valuable time and also reduces the likelihood that an incorrect or risky answer to the security questionnaire may be missed during a manual review. Once the risk assessment is completed, automated notifications are sent out to all the involved stakeholders, alerting them to the completion of the process and the associated decision. Like many of the other applications in our OnSpring platform, everything in the supplier risk management program is brought together into a single dashboard. This dashboard gives the analyst an overview of the program, allows them to complete a new supplier intake form, monitor key metrics, as well as see the queue of open or pending risk assessments. And we're currently working on another one of our big wins, which is adoption of the FAIR model. For those of you unfamiliar with FAIR, it stands for Factored Analysis of Information Risk. The FAIR model codifies and monetizes risk. In other words, it breaks down risk by identifying the building blocks of a risk scenario and their relationship to one another, and then converts it into financial terms. One of the key aspects of FAIR that's different from many other approaches to risk is that it relies on probabilistic forecasts of future scenarios. This made it a challenge, as OnSpring, or really any other GRC platform that we knew of, did not have a Monte Carlo simulation engine built in that would allow for those probabilistic forecasts to be run. These simulation engines typically come in purpose-built tools that are designed for quantitative risk analysis. Because this had, to our knowledge, never been built before, there was no roadmap. We had to solve a lot of challenges from the ground up and understand how we would bring the results of that Monte Carlo simulation into a tool that was not natively designed for it. While we are still in the process of building this out, we're using a combination of applications and surveys to gather the quantitative information from those closest to the risks. We then use an external Monte Carlo simulation engine to determine the outcome of those probabilistic forecast scenarios. The results of the simulation are then loaded back into OnSpring, allowing us to leverage those powerful relationships and automation for decision-making, notification, and tracking. As you can see, we've been able to launch some very powerful features in the 10 months since we purchased OnSpring. These features provided the quick ROI that we needed and will ensure continued executive buy-in to our platform implementation and our overall program. As we look to the future, we're continuing to look for ways to leverage the OnSpring platform for efficiencies both within the GRC team and across the entire organization. I encourage you to do the same, as you can usually find a variety of quick win opportunities throughout the rest of your organization, which will help you build cross-functional support for your GRC program. These opportunities are best found by looking for groups who are heavily reliant on spreadsheets, which can be easily replaced by an application, allowing for a wide variety of reporting and automation. Additionally, create a baseline or default approval flow that you can easily modify for future use. This will allow you to find groups who are regularly making decisions over email and deliver a quick win with minimal or sometimes no effort. Always approach these conversations as a partner. Make sure that you're taking the time to understand the processes that they have in place, what challenges they have, and how OnSpring can help them overcome them. Focus on what you can use out of the box. Prioritize changing internal processes to avoid unnecessary build work and perpetuating bad processes. For example, we discovered one of our enterprise groups was using email and spreadsheets to identify certain types of incidents, track them, and notify affected parties. When we approached them with the out-of-box applications from OnSpring, it was a clear improvement from the processes that they had in place, with almost no additional resource spend. These types of quick wins solve common and visible pain points across your organization and can be a great way to build rapport and buy-in for your other strategic objectives. Thank you so much for spending time with me today, and best of luck building your GRC programs.